Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and we are doing part 6 of Hurricane Katrina. I am so excited to get to talk about this stuff again. I know that you guys have been listening and been anxious to hear kind of the completion of the story, and I'm ready to tell it because it's been kind of a crazy situation with the Disney Plus documentary coming out, and there's a Netflix documentary coming out. I didn't, know those things were happening. And when I started this last year, I had no context or information, just kind of calling people and trying to get my timeline straight. And so I'm going to try to tighten that up. So, I realized that there's a new documentary on the 27th coming out from Netflix. And apparently the National Geographic did a documentary that came out this year, and it's on Disney Plus. And you guys should go and watch it. And so I'm kind of clarifying a few things. After I was sick last week, as you can hear a little bit of my voice, and I watched the documentaries to be able to get a timeline, which was interesting for them to do it. But so just for the timeline's sake, just to catch back up. Well, one more thing. We are going to put all of these episodes, we're going to drop them all on the 29th, all on iTunes and on Spotify, all in one sitting. So if anybody wants to share them or listen to them, you'll be able to just share one link and it'll play all the episodes. And then we'll leave it up for people to be able to break down those things. But for timeline's sake, so I kept saying, I don't know what day it is. I'm not sure it's the 3rd or the 4th. And the problem is that I lost a day. So I figured that out through the documentary or through watching the Disney Plus one or the National Geographic. So we got to New Orleans on the 27th. So the hurricane hits on the 29th. We get to New Orleans on the 27th. We go to the Superdome on the 28th, which was a Sunday, and we load up and go in the dome and get everybody kind of settled in. And on the 29th, the hurricane hit at 6 a.m. in the morning. So we had driven down there. You've heard that part of the story at this point. We got there, loaded everybody in the Superdome on the 28th, and then that morning the Superdome hits, and we spent the day hunkered down because, one half of the storm hits, then you get the middle of the storm, and then you got to deal with the other half of the storm. And so we pulled security, and then Tuesday the 30th is when the levees broke, and the people were trying to get to the Superdome, and we went out on the trucks and tried to rescue them. Wednesday the 31st, we dealt with the power going out and the possibility of all the abandoning the citizens and all that stuff. Thursday the 1st, we went out on the medical trucks to try to bring people from I-10 and Causeway in. And then Friday the 2nd, we started loading people on the buses. So for us, it was 5 days in the Superdome before people started leaving. It was 6 days since the storm before the buses got there. So basically, I was correct in the sense that we spent 5 or 6 days, in the Superdome dealing with the crisis before the buses arrived. And if you watch the Disney Plus documentary, they say the same thing. They confirm that. And so today we're picking up on this episode Saturday the 3rd. So this is day 6 in the dome and day 7 of us being deployed. So we've been there for about a week. We've loaded everybody on the buses. And again, if you get time to watch the Disney or History Channel documentary, you should check it out because it's interesting. I will say that pretty much everything they say is true about the government oversight. There's a major that's in the documentary that was there. His name was Ed Bush. I actually reached out to him. Shout out to Ed Bush if he is listening to this. I reached out to him on LinkedIn to try to get his information and maybe get him on. But I do remember seeing him a couple times and interacting with him. I'm pretty sure he was the guy. At one point, there was a chaplain or him with a megaphone that was helping kind of deal with people when they were getting on the buses. But I don't think he was from our company, from Alpha Company 527th, as far as I know. I would have known that, I believe. And as I stated earlier in the documentary, there was complete disconnect from leadership and the average soldier. So we had no clue what was happening and had no clear orders or direct lines of communication. So as the documentary goes on Disney Plus or National Geographic, there's a lot of things that are communicated that are being communicated by, let's say, Ed Bush, but he's a major, I think, at this time. And so if he's there, he's dealing with major stuff, right? He's dealing with the upper echelon. I don't know what he's doing, where he's at. He talks about it a little bit. I mean, obviously he was there and there was no like separation from the leadership and us. But my point to that is like, as an E5, as a soldier, nobody was communicating to me directly. I actually had a story this week of a friend of mine who, his friend was there with us, and he was saying how he had one of those trucks and he just was picking people up. And then his unit, like, they left, but nobody communicated with him. So he spent the entire day just driving back and forth, picking people up. And then another group of people showed up and like, hey man, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm just picking people up and bringing them back to the dome. And they're like, well, your unit's not even here. They moved down to, a different city. And he didn't know because there's just complete lack of of communication. The other thing I noticed while watching the documentary was that all of the shots are from day 1 through 3 showed that we had no weapons. So that was confirming that there isn't a soldier at the Superdome with a weapon like a AR-15. There's a couple of the SRT guys, I think, with pistols that you see on their hip. And so when you see aerial shots of the dome, where people are all out everywhere, and when they're describing going to and from the gates in the documentary, all those shots are from the day that you just listened to, the day when the buses actually came and were loading them up. So if you see the thousands of people gathered against a fence and they're all standing there clumped up in the documentary, that is what I was talking about yesterday when I was letting people in and on the buses, and there were just thousands of faces that were looking at me. I had never seen videos of that, so that was crazy to see this weekend, after just doing the episode the week before, to actually see video evidence of that. And so the documentary was very validating in a way because it also said that there were 30,000 people in the Superdome. And so when I told that story, I always feel a little anxious that those details aren't accurate because I want to be honest. And so pretty much everything up to this point, other than a day of the timeline, is 100% accurate. And the only reason that the timeline's off is because I thought the hurricane hit at night, and it hit so early in the morning, at like 4 o'clock in the morning, it started like, bashing us. And then at 6, it kind of came through, hit landfall. I was thinking that was night, just probably because we didn't sleep. So that one day, is kind of lost in my timeline because we didn't do much other than pull security and hunker down while the storm was kind of smashing against the Superdome. So the general who they interviewed in the documentary as well, I'll talk about him. He was a 3-star general, I believe. And along with the governor and the communications lady, nothing that they said was not true. But there's no way they got there. The film is showing it as if they're there day one. They don't say what day they got there in the documentary, but they're acting as if they were there the whole time. And that's just definitely not true. They didn't come inside the Superdome, and all the footage that I'm seeing is from day 4 or 5. Because the water had to get low enough for them to get to us. And so in part 5, I talk about that the day we loaded them on the buses, which was the 2nd of December, no one was there. Just our unit and some Air Force guys and the SRT team and the NOPD guys. So there were about 200 of us, and that was it. So apparently during that second day, or on the 2nd, like I talked about, is when everybody else became aware of what was going on and showed up. So I'm very interested in seeing the Netflix documentary on the 27th and seeing what it's about, because the National Geographic one on Disney Plus is 5 parts, and only about 20 minutes of it cover anything actually related to being in the Superdome or anybody's kind of experience. And so I'd love to hear from Ed Bush on Ed Bush on if he recorded a lot more information and they just didn't share it, or they cut it and clipped it, because it seems to me that the agenda is, to show that the government had massive failure. But, that's obviously what anybody's going to do. So I'm interested to see what Netflix is going to do. I did find myself being frustrated and a little anxious that this story has never been told from our perspective and from being actually a person in the Superdome. There was one guy who was telling his story from the civilian perspective, and I'm really mad or frustrated at myself for not telling it sooner. Had I known that like all these documentaries were being prepared and coming out, I would have loved to lend my voice to it. I know God is sovereign, and maybe this is the perfect thing to happen, which obviously that's what I believe, is that his timing is perfect. And so I have to take a deep breath and just realize, okay, God's got what's supposed to happen, and so maybe this podcast will do that and get our story connected to a company like Disney or Netflix. Because I believe after watching those other documentaries, I believe this story is the story of what really happened to those trapped in the dome, and the real story of what we as soldiers were dealing with as well. The Superdome stories were all of about, like I said, 20 minutes in this 5-part series, and yet those 4 days or 5 days before all the heroes got there to rescue us, I say that jokingly. I remember, there were Time Magazine articles and stuff in New York Times where they had the Air Force and Airborne, had cleared the streets of New Orleans was like the tagline. And I just remember being like, dude, y'all got there like a week later. So I really hope that you guys share this stuff and get it out there, because there's so many stories that need to be told that have not been told. And I find it interesting and verify why, I feel like this podcast and series is so vital to get out. So if you're listening and have any connections with any kind of big names or whatever, or want this story to be told, or this hits home, send me an email, connect me with somebody. And lastly, this story that I'm telling is not about politics or about placing blame on the government, although they have, major issues. I'm trying not to have an agenda, unlike what seems to be the case when documentaries come out to make a bunch of money. They typically want to paint everything in black and white terms and literally and figuratively. For a quick example, we're hearing of rapes and abuse and gang violence and snipers shooting at helicopters and at us and at the EMS workers. And these were firsthand accounts. These were people that I knew saying, hey, we saw this happened, or experiences that I had. So they were happening. And the documentary kind of alludes to the fact that all of that was not true. That the police chief, he kind of comes on the documentary and apologizes for saying that they were snipers. But the reality is that's what we call them. If you're in a helicopter and someone's shooting at you, they're a sniper. They might not be like a military sniper, a trained sniper, but you can't see them. They're hiding and shooting at your helicopter or shooting at your Humvee. They're sniper fire. That's what we're going to call it. And the general in the documentary, he alludes to the fact that, these people have watched too many action movies, quote, and they were shooting at the helicopter to try to get them they thought they could get the helicopter to come and help them by shooting at it. And look, I just don't buy that. I don't think that everybody in New Orleans are good people and every single one of them had good intentions just to be rescued. Sometimes in crisis, people do things that are awful, like shoot at helicopters and Humvees because they're mad and they're ticked off and they have ill will. And so it's interesting, in a room full of 30,000 people, to say there were no rapes or there was no abuse or there were none of these things happening, just because there's not actual video evidence of it or a picture of it. And again, the guy says it in the documentary, who's going to video that? Because he was telling the story of those things happening. And so, yes, was everyone raping and stealing children? No. But was every report false? Also no. There were reports that were true and things that we saw and experienced that definitely happened. And if it happened one time, it's too many. And if it was happening multiple times, then that was enough to spread and terrify the others and ourselves and get everything worked up. And so we've got to recognize that. And that just seemed very biased in the documentary, to kind of paint a picture that everybody was there suffering because of government oversight, but they were just good people just trying to survive. And the only reason they were doing anything was out of desperation. And it's just not that black and white. And so I felt like that needed to be said. And so let me start back where we were. So if you recall, I had walked from loading the people on the buses all day, and I got in the water, and I had pulled security, and I had passed out. I went to sleep. Well, I thought that I made it through this night unscathed, but I was awakened to things getting even messier in the middle of the night. So after I passed out that morning, we're told that one of my friends, and I won't mention his name on here, but he knows who he is, from high school, who was still in the National Guard with me, he had gotten attacked and shot in the leg by someone in the Superdome. And so people were out for blood. Our guys were so mad and upset. And some of the guys went back in to try to find out what happened and tried to find the guy who shot him. And it put a very clear line in the sand of us versus them at that point. And we had removed ourselves from the dome. So we just kind of had this mentality at that point of like, we're done with these people. We're surviving, like we're getting out of here. That was most people's thoughts. And so I thank God that we were stationed outside at that point, because we had left and nobody wanted to go back in, and it could have gotten really bad. There were other guys, we knew that had the job now. They had taken over, and they had plenty of rest and clean uniforms. So we were kind of moving on, and vengeance wasn't worth it. I mean, we were upset that our buddy got shot, but we, weren't really interested in going back in there and dealing with any of that. And so later, the story we got from my buddy was that he had went back in the dome to try to take a shower. He was going to pour water bottles over himself in the shower or something. And there was a guy who jumped out and grabbed him, and they were wrestling, and the gun went off and it shot him in the leg. So we had thought at the time that somebody shot him with their own gun, but he actually got shot in the leg with his own rifle. But we didn't know that at the time. We found that out later. And so at this point, we just think somebody had attacked our friends. So more information basically coming in that people are shooting at helicopters. There's sniper fire at the helicopters. There's sniper fires at us. At some point, we can hear things pinging off the side of the wall and somebody shooting, and so it was crazy. And so when I wake up the next day after I go back to sleep and start moving around, there are many different units that had arrived, and the news was around. There were cops and police and government officials everywhere. And as you can imagine, we're really traumatized and confused. We just went from 7 days of chaos, minute by minute, survival, to nothing, to sitting in a car garage with like no resources, no plan really, no direction. And all these other people are showing up as if they're like the cavalry. Like they're showing up like, hey, we're here. And the arrogance of this is that we had already been there for a week, right? We had already been there for 6 days dealing with all this kind of stuff. And so even our own people showing up and acting like that, I remember that would just really made me mad, because they had not shown up and helped us. And so, I'm just sitting on a cot under a car garage wondering what's going to go on, and just fuming, but also just being so glad that part was over. And at this point, it was super gross everywhere. There was just trash and muck everywhere. The bottom of the car garage was full of water, and we had nothing to wash with or clean it up. And so, people used that as the bathroom. So I remember, you had to go down to the bottom and just hold on to the rail and hang over to use the bathroom, or stand down there and pee. And at one point I remember slipping, and I had sandals on or something, and my feet went into the water, and it was so gross. And I was like, oh, this is where everybody just peed and pooped and everything else. And I wanted to throw up. And so I got some water bottles and some soap and tried to like clean myself off something the best I could. And the clean uniform that I hadn't changed into was still by my cot. And I couldn't wait to strip and put it back on. Like I remember, after pulling security, I didn't get back down into my drawers, I don't think, and lay there. I think I just laid back down and passed out without taking my clothes off, because I was so miserable and so tired. But first I needed to figure out kind of what was going on. So I was ready to change, but then I was like, man, let me go move around and find our leadership and see what's going on. And so I went around and checked on my friends, and I hadn't seen some of them in a few days. And so I was connected with them and we shared some stories, and, got more information about what they were dealing with and what they were seeing. And a lot of it was the same. And, 20 years later, being led to believe that the things my friends told me and the things I saw, they did happen, even though people are trying to tell me they didn't. And we had heard some news from about a cop getting shot and killed at a gas station, and that was on the news. I looked that up, and that the looting was like getting out of hand, that people were breaking into everything outside of the Superdome. So at this point, everything moved from the Superdome and the convention center being basically hell on earth to now the water is receding. People can drive again. And everybody who stayed in New Orleans is now, and who didn't make it to the Dome, are now migrating into the city and breaking into things and taking things. And again, we hear civilians are shooting at helicopters and Humvees, and we're in martial law, and it's crazy. Now, I want to remind you, I'm 22 years old at this point, and I have no clue what any of this means. I don't know what martial law means. I don't know what any authority figure is doing around me. We're just trying to make it out of here alive, and I'm trying to go back to school. I'm like, man, I want to go back to tech. We've done our time. We came in and served. This was crazy. Let me get out of here. for those of you who don't know, I had already been to basic training during 9/11. So my second week of basic training was 9/11. I went, graduated high school in 2001, left in July to go to Fort Leonard Wood. And so September 11th was 2 weeks into basic training, and I was on the rifle range learning how to shoot my AR-15, and the towers got hit. And so a year and a half or so after that, I went to Afghanistan and served over there as a combat engineer. And now this had, come back, and I'd already served in several hurricane activation cleanups and deployments, and lots of training. And yet nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for this situation. And I recall opening my Bible again multiple times and reading through Psalm 27 over and over again just that day, trying to get some clarity and some grounding that morning on what just happened and what is happening. At some point we heard, like I said, something hitting the side of the car garage, and someone looked out and we could see muzzle fire from a person taking pop shots off standing up on the sideway. Like they were just literally popping off fire, like shooting from a pistol at the side of the car garage for no reason. And so I didn't see this, but my buddy had said he saw like a state trooper pull their car up on the side of the thing and get out and pull a shotgun out and open fire on the guy. And those are the kind of things that were happening that we were hearing about and that we're being told. And it was just insanity. So I know I mentioned the SRT team a couple times. Let me explain that a little bit because this comes into play. So who they are is these guys are kind of the Special Reaction Unit. That's what SRT stands for, Special Reaction Unit. And they're like the military police and the SWAT combined. So they go in for hostage situations, crisis interventions. They wear these black hats, unlike our regular BDU hats that stand out. And this is before like berets came in. And so thank God. And these guys were there with us. And they were about 35 of them, I remember. And I ran into them a few times. And you can see them in the Disney Plus videos. You'll see them a few times with their black hats on. And I had a couple buddies who were in our unit who had joined the SRT team so they could do some side work. And so like most special units, these guys were, thought they were the jam. And so they didn't really treat us well. They were kind of separate from us. And but I knew several of the guys, so they treated me pretty well. I don't remember if I told this story, but one of the things that when we got there, my sideburns were always like right at the close of regulation, because in the National Guard you can push the limit because you're not always working, so you don't cut your sideburns off at the top of your ear. You can do them down to like your lobe or whatever, but I would always leave them a little longer. And so when we get there, one of the SRT guys were like chewing me out because I didn't shave and my sideburns weren't regulation. And one of my other buddies come over and like, hey, he's good, leave him alone. But that kind of happened throughout the whole thing, is that they tried to, would try to intercede and lead. And so it's just kind of a mess system. But they did amazing work and showed up and really helped. And so there's just always this tension when you have like SRT unit there, you have the Alpha Company unit there, you have the Air Force there, you have the NOPD, you have nobody who's in charge. You can imagine at times that there's tension of who wants to take control and who wants to do what. But these guys in the black hats like really showed up and helped us out a lot. And thank God they were there, because they had a lot more training than we did to be able to deal with any kind of crisis or hostage stuff. We were just kind of winging it because that's not what we do. And so they were much more like the police unit of the National Guard that really, really helped us. So shout out to SRT guys who were in Katrina. I really appreciate all your effort and work that you did, and how you guys, sacrificed for our country and for our state to be able to have the extra training to come into these crisis situations and help people out. So if you were an SRT guy and you were there, man, thank you so much for the work and effort. And sorry if I gave you a hard time as a punk 22-year-old kid trying to just survive. Sorry, my sideburns were a little too long. Later in the day, so that's important, because later in the day, after we, I've kind of walked around, caught up with everybody, checked in, at some point, I'm resting and sitting around on the cot talking to Prater and Sergeant Smoker. I get a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and it's the Command Sergeant Major of the SRT team. Now, I don't know his name. I probably could find it. But I remember his face. He was this graying, haired guy with a mustache, and he had these thick black rimmed glasses on. And he says, Sergeant, we need some help. And I was like, okay. And he's like, my SRT team is pinned down at a hospital and they're taking fire. He says there's looters and there's gang members who have broken into the neonatal unit at the hospital and who have the doctors held at gunpoint. And he says, my unit is running out of ammo and they're pinned down. And I need for you to go and get 7 guys and go in and get them out. He said, there's a Black Hawk that's going to be landing in 10 minutes to take you to the hospital. You need to load up and get your ass moving. And he says, can you handle this, Sergeant? Now, the words left me before my brain could think. So I said, yes, Command Sergeant Major. But looking back on this now, there's no reason that first of all, I was just an E5, so I'm like nobody. And I think I was an E5. I may have been an E4, but I think I was an E5. And I mean, comes and gets me. I'm a sergeant at this point and tells me this situation's happening. I should have asked more questions. But instead I popped up like lightning, had hit me in the butt, and I ran. I remember running and grabbing my Kevlar, my helmet, flak jacket, and that kind of stuff, put that on, got some ammunition, got some extra rounds that I could find, and was like, okay, well, what am I doing? So I got to be honest, I didn't get a lot of combat in Afghanistan. Like I hadn't, and it's been a long time since I've talked about all this, so I don't even know some of the names of the gear anymore. But we're combat engineers with an emphasis on the engineer part, not an emphasis on the combat part. So although you get training in the Army, you know how to shoot your weapon, like I hadn't had any practice, and it had been 2 years since, we had done any of that. And so there were people, in the National Guard that went to like FOBs, which is like a forwarding observation base. So there were some of us who got to deal with the special forces in Afghanistan and who were in a little bit more combat. And some of them even got like combat action badges and combat patches. Some of us did. And I didn't get a combat action badge, but I have some combat patches. And we get those for being in a combat zone when you get deployed, not necessarily that you did a lot of shooting or got a lot of shooting at. And I got one from the 82nd Airborne, who are the All-Americans. I've got one from the 18th Airborne Dragoons and the 10th Mountain Division as well. But those are the guys who do the heavy lifting. Like we're not heavily trained in this type of combat situation. And so helicopters in hospitals with civilians that live 3 hours from my hometown, that's insane. And so, of course, I didn't think any of this at the time. I'm too tired and worn out. I had just laid down for the first time in 7 days. I don't know what are the rules of engagement. Hell if I knew what any of that stuff was. And I look around and I have to decide who to take and who to leave. And so I'm looking around myself thinking, man, I have no clue who, kind of like Sergeant Prater, like I've got to ask somebody to come with me. That sucks. But also have to trust the person that I'm asking to come with me. And that sucks too. And so I go and pick a few guys and get them geared up, tell them to get their stuff on, luckily we had our bags at this point. And I tell them the mission and the objective. Go and get these guys out. The rules of engagement are shoot first and ask questions later. And if we can get these guys on the chopper, then we take over and clear the hospital. So we go in, get the guys under fire, get them out because they're out of ammo and they're hunkered down, get them on the helicopter, and then replace them and clear the hospital from these people. And at this point, I remember hearing a Black Hawk, land on the roof, come in, and the command sergeant major is yelling for me, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Now, I don't remember all the guys that I picked. I remember a couple of them. But I think there was a team of 7 or 8 of us. And so we run up to the top of if you've been to, the Superdome, if you're from New Orleans, the top of the car garage is this flat place you can walk to go get to your car, and there's parking and stuff. And so the helicopters landed up there. And so I run up there and get the guys on there, and I hear the command sergeant major yelling at me from behind, and these guys load up, and I'm the last one to get there, and I turn, and he says, did you grab the extra ammo? And I'm like, no, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, there's a case downstairs. You guys need that or you're going to run out. And so I have to run down to the Humvee and grab some more this. It's a wooden case that has all the ammo in it. And I'm packing this wooden case by myself, which is super heavy. And I get to the top, and you just kind of throw it in the helicopter and slide it in the other guy's feet. And, they start opening it and passing rounds around in magazines. And I turn and look, and there's like one spot for me. And of course it's at the door. So it's at the side of this Black Hawk. The door's open. And if you haven't seen a Black Hawk, Google it, right? It's kind of the troop carrier of helicopters. And so as the leader of this little pack of untrained delinquents, I get the good seat. I get the outside seat. The one that in every movie, the guy who, when they land, the guy, when the doors fall down, like Saving Private Ryan, on the beaches of Normandy, the doors fall and ping, that guy's getting hit in the head. The helicopter lands and ping, that dude's getting shot in the face. Like, that's what I'm picturing at this point is like, okay, we're going to land, on under fire, and I'm getting shot right in the head as everyone else steps off. And so as the bird is about to take off, the command sergeant major comes jumping up on the side, and he pulls this small mirror out of his pocket. I'll never forget this. He has this little tiny mirror, and he pulls it out of the front pocket of his BDU jacket. He says, hey, we don't have comms, and so if you get hit and you go down, you need to get the pilot's attention so he can come back around and get you guys. So just flash this, use the sun and use this mirror and flash the helicopter. He'll swoop back down in and get you if he can. And I'm thinking, great. This is how this little trip to New Orleans ends. Me with a bullet through my head and a mirror in my pocket. Like, it's so crazy as I say it. But I shout to the other guys, right? And so I get on the helicopter. I yell at them. We got they're kind of loaded up. I'm loading up, and I'm telling them like, hey, I'm putting this in my pocket. So if I go down, you know where to get it. You know how to get the helicopter to come back. And so I start loading mags myself and through gritted teeth. And so, you've heard people say that they feel like their heart's going to beat out of their chest. But unlike any other time in my life, like I literally feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. After all the excitement and exhaustion of the 6 days before, my cortisol is pumping, my heart is beating, and my head literally feels like it's going to explode out of the side of my ear. And looking back on this moment, I don't recall asking anybody permission from my unit or telling anybody where I was going. Like this just all happens. And I'm just doing it, and we're just doing it, and it happens so fast. And like nobody knows where we're at. Nobody knows what we're doing. I have no comms. I don't have a radio. I don't have anything to tell anybody anything. And I think looking back, like this is just another moment where God put me, I'm not going to say the right place at the right time. Like I definitely don't want to do that again. But these moments, these situations just deeply shaped the way in which, I am and who I am and how he's made me. And so it's crazy to look at this and go, man, out of all the people that are there, this thing happens. And so he wanted me to be there. He wanted me somehow to be in this situation and lead these guys and do this thing and experience it. And so with a roar and a thrust, the Black Hawk lifts off right from the top of the car garage into the air, just flying. And it's like nothing I've ever experienced. I mean, we are lifting higher and higher at a very steep angle. And we are flying at 100 and something miles an hour over the city of New Orleans. And for the first time, now I see what has truly happened. Everything is covered in water. It is like an ocean on top of buildings and houses. There are like snakes of the highway that are crawling out of the water. And I can see specks of people still walking around on the overpasses. And now there's some movements in the streets. Right now the water is receded in some areas, and I can see little flecks of people walking around. And as we pass these large buildings in New Orleans, we can see that all the windows are blown out, and there are things stuck in the side of them like cars. We can see boats in the middle of the road and vehicles thrown into houses and on top of buildings, boats on top of houses. Hardly anything is salvaged. Like everything is destroyed. And I see the roof of the Superdome that has been ripped off, and I can see the boards and planks underneath, and I see the trash and devastation left by all those inside, and the hundreds of new cars and vehicles that are coming to help. I can see the caravan of cars coming, and there are cop cars and people everywhere in clumps and crowds, and we're just screaming through the air towards this hospital. And as we pass over the Mississippi River, there are barges smoking and flipped over. Like the river's there, everything's destroyed, And I could draw it in my mind. Like there are these barges that are just that have been on fire, that are smoking, that are turned over, that are crashed into the shore. It looks like somebody literally dropped a nuke and then flooded the world. And I remember thinking about Noah and how insane it must have been to see more water than this. Like for the whole world to be flooded and it be like this, and feeling this kind of camaraderie and the survival of that, and wanting to do something for God, right? Wanting to be there and be a light in the darkness. And, that kind of coming across my mind as I saw this water. And so we're flying through the air. I mean, it's crazy. I'm looking at everybody else. Their eyes are wide. We get, yelled at by the pilot. Hey, we got 6 minutes, lock and load. Let's get ready, to go in. So, I'm looking at everybody, giving them some orders, telling them what we're going to do. And I know these other guys were just as tired and confused and terrified as I was. Because I'm going to be honest, I was terrified. Like, I was scared. I thought I was going to die. I knew I was going to die. I had no clue what we were doing. No plan of action other than just do what sounds good. I remember praying and singing worship songs. I remember specifically kind of looking out of the window, looking at these guys' face and just humming some songs to myself, saying some encouraging words, saying some prayers out loud, whatever liturgies I could think of, whatever worship songs I could think of. And I was thinking of everything that I could ask God for provision and recite any line of scripture I could recall. And I looked in the eyes of my friends that were scared and that were overwhelmed. And I felt like my heart was about to burst. And so I said out loud the first few verses of Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When my enemies come against me, devour my flesh. Even then I will be confident," and pop. It was like the peace that surpasses all understanding surrounded me in an instant. It was like God took his two hands and wrapped them around me in this bubble. And I felt fully protected and fully calm and fully confident in a way that I've never felt before. And I remember looking out of the window and looking at my guys and just feeling like, we got this. Like, God is good. And I had prepared myself to die. I'd prepared myself to get injured. I'd prepared myself for whatever the situation was. And I knew that if I died, I was going to be with Jesus. And that I had a job to do, and it was to keep these other guys safe and to be confident. And so I wanted to prepare myself to do this well. And I remember having this feeling a couple of times in my life of like, actually, you could die, but never as strong as this moment. And it's, again, one of those moments that like secures your faith in a way that in whatever situation you find yourself in the future, nothing really can compare. Now, obviously, I'm talking to you, so I lived. But if you've never felt like you were truly about to die, well, I really can't explain it. Like, people go, oh, my life flashed before my eyes, or it scared me to death, or they say all this stuff, or I thought it was over. But it's really rare for you actually to be in that situation in life, especially in 2025 America. There are things that come close, but man, it was just such a formative thing. And so at the moment, the pilot is having a hard time figuring out which hospital it was. There was no one on any of the roofs, and so we're kind of flying around some hospitals. I mean, we're yelling back and forth, trying to look for people, trying to see if anybody's shooting anything or at anybody. And I remember as we circled to land, right before we landed, I hear him yell like, "Damn it!" And it was the wrong hospital, so we take off in another direction, and he figures out whichever hospital it is, but there's a medical helicopter that's landed on the roof of this hospital, and we're looking at it, and the Black Hawk's not slowing down, and so down we go, and we're circling this roof to land at an alarming rate, and right at the end, the smaller helicopter kind of lifts off and gets out of the way at the last minute, and down we come. And so we land, with a thud, and there's nobody on the roof at this point, so we spill off the back of the helicopter, weapons out and ready. No sign of the bad guys on the roof. It's still clear and calm, loud. And so I slap the next man on the back, and we do what's called a bounding overwatch formation, and we have these kind of two smaller groups. And so the one group holds their position, and the other group moves forward, and then we slap each other on the shoulder and let each other know we're passing, and we pass around until we can get in the door. And so we clear the roof of this hospital, make sure there's nobody up there, and then we open the door and go down the stairwell. And here we come. Like we're ready for bullets to start flying, and we're looking for downed SRT members, and we're trying to figure out what's going on, and we're clearing the stairwell. And as we come into the hospital, there was this set of double doors in the hallway. And so I come take the lead position. I just kick the doors open with weapons like ready and drawn. And I can't forget this either. The doors kick open, and it's just like there's like 4 or 5 doctors and nurses that are just kind of standing there looking at us with wide eyes. And I actually remember one of the nurses kind of dropping a clipboard, and there were patients and doctors who either screamed or just like were frozen. And so we're like, hey, what's going on? Where are the guys? And so apparently this was not the right place either. And they had not had any problems with gunfire. There was no SRT team there. And so I'm like, son of a gun. So get our guys. We run back up to the roof. I flash the Black Hawk. He comes back down and lands. And we jump back on there and evacuate. Like to our joy, honestly, he lets us know that that the mission's over, that somebody had already taken care of them and gotten them out, and that we're going to head back to the Superdome. And as we flew back over, I felt a little level of disappointment. It's this weird thing when you prepare yourself to die or to get in combat or to get wounded, that you kind of feel like you miss out. It's like even telling the story, it's like, well, nothing happened, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Obviously, you guys can hear that it is a big deal. But the calm that I had like kind of slowly drifted away, and this sick and just exhausted feeling washed over me. And I remember continuing to pray, but I almost felt like we had failed in some ways, and that we're going back empty-handed. I look back now, and like many things, I'm thankful to God that he protected me, my heart and my mind and my soul from something much worse. I'm very thankful I did not have to go in and shoot armed civilians. But when you have to prepare yourself to do something like that, right, it does its own damage and has its own impact. There are several books out that I like that if you're interested in. One's called On Killing and one's called On Combat. They explain and express the difference in ways in which combat affects the psyche. So depending on the leadership, the mission, the direction of the team and the team you're under, and depending on the closeness of the bad guy and the similarity in which they look to you, determines the level of trauma to your brain. So if you believe in your country and you believe in your government and you believe in the mission, you believe in your job and you believe in your unit and you believe in your team, that limits or lowers the trauma's impact on your brain and your body. And the more distant you are for the example that I just gave, you're dropping a bomb versus choking a person or stabbing a person with a knife, the closer you are, the more traumatic it is. And the more distant you are, the less impact that killing has on you. And then lastly, the person looks like you, right? So if they look like you, it's more traumatizing than if they don't look like you. It dehumanizes them when they look different than you. So being white or black in America and killing someone who is Vietnamese or Iranian is much different than shooting someone who looks like your neighbor. Now, this varies, of course, depending on your location in the United States and your exposure to other ethnicities. But for this white boy from Louisiana, at this point, my experience was limited to Afghanistan and Louisiana. This was just set up for all the PTSD you could ever get, because the person's resiliency to trauma and previous experiences with violence or a crisis can also make an impact, as well as their training. And so in my situation in New Orleans 2005, I didn't trust the government. They had clearly messed up taking care of people. I didn't know the mission, survival of the fittest. I didn't have a leadership that I trusted or a plan, which was just shoot to kill at this point. And we're going to face with people who look just like us and that lived 3 hours from my house my entire life, killing poor black civilians. That's our plan. We also have zero training from an urban combat or preparation. And the guys that I'm on this team with, I don't really know or trust. And even though we didn't kill anyone, those other factors themselves, they make a huge impact. And the fact that we were prepared for that reality, and that's what was going on, really messed me up in the coming months and years. But that's a story for another time. So as we approached the dome, coming back and land, I recall being so thankful and sad at the same time. I wanted the Black Hawk to fly me back to Ruston and get me the hell out of there. And instead, I found myself shaking hands with the first sergeant and him telling me that I'm going to get an Army Accommodation Medal when I get back. And he pressed this coin in my hand, and I turned and waved to the Black Hawk pilot off and walked down the stairwell back to my cot with no plan. And one of my buddies came up and was like, "Hey man, where you been? We're starting to clean up some trash and stuff. Like where you guys been at?" And I'm like, "Bro, let me tell you this story." And he's like, "Well, we're about to move out to go to the Alero Center, and so we need to kind of tighten some things up and pick some things up." And at some point, I remember this day after this mission and coming back, I remember walking around, and we had heard that the rest of our unit, so the rest of Alpha Company 527, who either didn't show up when they were supposed to or couldn't get there in time, were coming. And so I remember standing on this bridge watching my friends like CJ Rochelle pull up in a deuce and a half. And I was so angry, at many of them. Now, CJ, for example, he was one of those people who he would have shown up, but he couldn't because he was in like a training. And so you can't have active double orders. And so he had finished his school and then he had come down. But there were a lot of guys who, didn't show up for all kinds of other reasons. And we just felt very abandoned by these guys. And these guys, we were very upset with. And I remember looking at them as they pulled up. We were on this like bridge and they were driving over it, and we were waving and they were waving at us. And I'm sure I gave them the finger or said, "Welcome to the shit show," or some such. But, or something like, "Thanks for finally showing up, but we got it. We don't need your help now." That was something that I probably said. So they get there, and after much, giving them grief and busting their chops, we got our gear and started heading out. And the stories we heard from people who were at the convention center sounded just as awful as the dome. And so, I don't know if anybody's told that story, but it kind of felt like a smaller Superdome. The same sort of things: violence, chaos, anarchy, cops getting shot, sniper shooting civilians, gangs looting, stealing anything that wasn't tied down. And half the police were doing some of the really awful things as well. I mean, it was crazy what the NOPD officers were, where they were at and how they were surviving. And we didn't know who to trust. We didn't know what was true. We just were hearing stories and what we experienced. And we just had to make it through the night the best we could to get out of there. The next day we were going to leave. And so, now remember, this is the second day that the buses are there. So the buses that we had loaded some people up, and this whole other day, the buses were still getting there. And so that night, we were going to go to the Alero Center the next day. That night we have another mission come in, and see downtown the buses were coming as well, and they were driving down to the middle of the city. Dozens of buses were coming to pick up hundreds and hundreds of people that were stranded and that were walking up. And a group of 10 or so of us were asked to go pull security and help them, the civilians, gather on the buses and get out of there. And so we all piled in the back of these troop carriers without tops and headed down the street. When we got there were hundreds of people standing around, gathered, waiting on the buses. And some of them had been in the dome, and others had somehow, survived and walked to this meeting point. They had been told by someone driving around. You can see this on the Disney Plus documentary, that they would, once they could get in there with trucks, the other National Guard people or the Army were riding around like, "Hey, these are where the buses are coming, go to this cross street and intersection." And so these people were tired and terrified and angry, and they had heard all sorts of rumors about us, about the government, about each other. And so we wanted to keep this calm and keep everybody safe. But of course, this is not easy in this environment. And it got darker and darker. And I want to paint this picture, though. So we had pulled over the 3 troop carriers and pointed them towards the road back towards the dome. And then there was a lot of water in between us and the people, and this like concrete place where the buses were going to pull in. And more people just kept walking towards us and circling us, and still no buses. And so the crowd is getting more anxious and more angry. They're asking us questions. They're accusing us of trying to kill them. They're telling us these stories they've heard. They're threatening to harm us. And they're saying we're going to leave them to die, and we've left them to die. And we busted the dams, and, we blew the levees, and just all this stuff they had heard. And so it is really chaotic out in the middle of the street, because now there's nobody on the sides of us. There's no kind of organization. There's no building to go into. And we have no way to check them for weapons or know what they would do. Luckily, right before dark, the 3 buses pull up. It's like mass chaos. Like, people are trying to run to the bus. They're trying to get on there, and more people are coming. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to organize, because these buses are only going to be able to take so many people. So we do this for a while, and I can't remember if a couple buses came or what, but at some point it's late, and everybody's tired, and not all these people are getting on buses. At some point there are no more buses coming, and that means that these men, women, and children are going to be left in the dead of night in the dark with us. And so we're standing on this like natural island where the water can't reach us, and the people are standing on the other side of the water, and the buses are going to start to pull away. And I'm like, what are we going to do about this? Because people are jumping on the buses. They're trying to get inside. They've already been doing this. And so we're having to push them away and threaten them with, get back. And at this point, I remember I slowly start walking backwards towards one of the military guys that are leading our little convoy. And I remember telling him really quietly, like, hey, dude, like, start rounding the guys up. I start slowly walking around, slowly, discreetly going to each guy and go, hey, look, when these buses pull off, these last of these buses, we have got to run and get in the trucks. So make sure they're cranked, because we can't do anything about this. And we've already told the people they need to go to the Superdome, and it's like a froth, right? The people are just so mad. They're screaming all kinds of stuff. They're angry, and they're feeling like they're literally like we're abandoning them, even though we told them where to go. But they've heard about the dome or come from the dome, so they don't want to go there and deal with any of that. And so I know we can't possibly bring all of them back, and we're tired and exhausted and don't have the capacity to fight at this point, and definitely do not want to shoot anybody and do not want to be shot. And so without any kind of like safety, like, we don't want our weapons taken. We don't want any of that stuff happening. So, there are women and children in the group, but the teens and the men, don't seem like they're going to go nicely or wait here for more buses. And so as the buses start to pull off and come between us and the crowd, it's like they realize it at the same time. And our trucks start driving away, and we start running to jump on there. And so people are like literally in mass, like a zombie horde, running towards the trucks through the water that separate us from them, and trying to make it to dry ground and get to our trucks. And so we jump on the back, and I'm like, hey guys, like, go to the Superdome. Like, it's literally a couple of blocks. Like, we're not too far from the Superdome, so we're not like abandoning them, but we just don't have the capacity. And we just didn't have much choice. And, we couldn't stay with them all night. We didn't have any resources to help them. We had told them to walk down to the dome, but they didn't want to. And, that's the hard part about Katrina. It's like there's no good answer for lots of these things. And walking 2 blocks in the dark, it sucks, but like, they have help there. There's water, there's provision. And so just trying to balance between the needs of the ferocious mob of people and the innocent victims that are in between. Man, it's just so traumatizing to me. Like, all of this is the hard part about it, is just feeling just a complete lack of helplessness and no control. They had no control over themselves. We had no control over their circumstances. We are in the same mess that they're in. And, that's what we had to do. And so these people lost everything. All they had was gone. Their families were gone. Some of their children were dead or starving. There were groups of buses and helicopters and military planes that were going to fly them out of their home and drop them in another city or state with no plan or resources or communication. I mean, it's just truly a nightmare. And so we get back to the Superdome, and this night we get little more sleep. And we're told the next day that we're heading out and going to take a break and make a plan from there. I mean, as tired as you could possibly be trying to load up all of our stuff on these trucks so that we could get out of there. And, I just remember feeling super sad that we were leaving the people, but also very, very happy that we were getting out of there and going to get some help. And just to remind you, we were the Ready Reaction Team for the state of Louisiana at the time. So the whole deal was Ready Reaction Team goes in that first day of crisis. They tend to the thing, and then for that month, they're the first ones in, they're the first ones out. So that everybody comes in and helps you. But unfortunately, this hurricane did a little more damage than usual, which we didn't really know yet. We weren't fully invested. So we're thinking we're leaving and going back to Alexandria, but we were not going anywhere. We would end up staying there 4 more months and pulling security and doing cleanup. And so that's the end of this day, is that it was a wild one. And tomorrow we will be pulling out and heading out to the Alero Center, and I get to tell you that wrap up. So we're going to do 2 more episodes, and I'll tell you kind of the wrap up of, there were some crazy stories why we were pulling security and stuff, but and maybe I'll finish some the rest of the year. But on the anniversary of Katrina on the 29th, we'll load all this stuff up and you can hear the whole thing. I thank you guys for listening. I thank you guys for hearing my story. Again, the point of this story is that God is good and that he can take really horrible things that you go through and he can use them for your good. And I'll last session kind of wrap that story up and put some meaning to all this. But thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. God bless you and have a good day.